OK, this is Breakfast with Stephen and Anne. Good morning to you. Should we go through the papers this morning?
Yes, let's.
Because we have two wonderful guests with us this morning, Benedict Spence and Emma Wolfe. Good to see you both.
Morning.
Emma, let's start with the front of the Times, should we?
Yes.
Tax cuts. The PM's talking tax cuts.
Yes.
Which I don't understand, because a couple of weeks ago we were promised tax cuts in March, and then last week they seemed to be rowing back on it, and now they're back on.
What a surprise. I mean, we do have an election coming, and guess what? The Prime Minister is telling us the economy is going to get better. He's saying a vote for the Conservatives will be a vote for lower taxes. A combination of tax cuts and falling mortgage rates is going to make everybody in Britain feel much better. We're facing an economic gear shift. It's all going to be fine.
Oh, I like that.
Of course,
economic
he's not.
Gear shift.
Of course, there's no real meat on the bones. I mean, let's wait and see exactly. Let's wait and see for March, and let's see what the spring budget actually gives us. But in this interview with the Times, of course, he wants people to feel good and to feel positive. Basically, the truth is they're desperate about this 25-point poll lead of Labour, and, you know, he'll promise anything at the moment.
And tax cuts make such a neat headline, doesn't it?
Of course it does.
It does. I suppose it must be very frustrating if you're Rishi Sunak, because the Labour Party isn't, I think, enthusing too many people, and he is sort of throwing everything he can find at the wall to try to get that dial to shift in terms of opinion polls, and it's just not working. And I think that that's just a reflection of, frankly, how fed up a lot of people are at the performance of this government, that they think to themselves, well, you could offer me significant tax cuts and I'm still not going to vote for you. A really wonderful endorsement for the last 14 years. As we get closer to a general election, as and when that may be, you might start to see it narrowing, because I think obviously more focus will be placed on the Labour Party. To be honest, they haven't had quite so much scrutiny up to now, but I think, as Emma says, he could offer you absolutely anything, and a lot of people would go, that sounds very nice, I don't trust you to deliver it.
I think that's it. I think people have simply lost trust, lost faith, lost patience, and almost are completely exhausted with this Conservative government. And also, we can't ignore the fact that Sunak has had a lot of disasters over the last few months, over the last year or so. It hasn't been plain sailing. All the fiasco about Rwanda, all of that. You know, people are absolutely fed up. And when they look at their lives and who's in power, they don't feel good. We're poorer than we were, you know, at the beginning of his tenure. Getting poorer, it seems, even though we're being told, oh, the economy's on the up, economic gear shift, good times they are coming.
I mean, live in hope.
Well, the spring is coming. I think that is a good thing, but that's got nothing to do with Rishi Sunak.
It'll be very interesting for you on Monday night when you host the People's Forum, where people will be able to put their points to Rishi, whether people who've naturally come from GBNEWS audience and you might expect to be more, not deferential, but at least conservative-leaning, it will be very interesting to see whether they're hostile towards him or not, won't it?
Oh, it will, but also priorities. That's what he needs to take away from this, is really understanding priorities.
Yeah.
But when you make pledges and you don't deliver on any of them, it's so easy to just sling mud at it.
It's very tricky, though, because actually where do natural Conservative voters go? There's all this talk about the Reform Party creeping up in the polls, doing very well. But actually, we've seen this before with insurgent right-wing parties, is that there's this great scare that they're going to disrupt the Conservative Party. And then, at the last minute, people get into the voting booth and they think, but I don't want to let Labour in. So they do end up voting Conservative.
I know, but also I think there's going to be the low turnout thing at this election. I think a lot of people, as you say, homeless Conservatives who can't quite bring themselves to do the reform thing and let Labour in by the back door and just think, do you know what? I will not vote for either of the two main parties.
Yes.
Yeah,
I wonder.
Well, we shall see. What's going on in the Church of England, Benedict, according to The Guardian? PCC meetings getting out of control?
Yes, I can't imagine what it is that they're getting so irate, but apparently raised voices, banging on tables, language isn't quite up to standard, and now there's a suggestion that they're going to have to sort of introduce a code of conduct for people, which might see people expelled. And I just think the Church of England has been in the news for not great reasons in the last couple of weeks, surrounding, limited but nonetheless present examples of migrants claiming to convert and then perhaps not being quite as Christian as they might have been. There was another example, actually, in the Times today of a man who couldn't be deported back to Iran because he got a Christian tattooed onto himself in prison or something like that.
Clever.
Yeah, it is rather clever. It's rather difficult to hide. I don't know if we do sort of a state-sponsored tattoo removal as part of our general removal program.
Yes.
But yeah, it's things are not. Times are not great in the Church of England. Especially when you.
So obviously
also,
people are losing their temper and they're banging their fists on tables.
And at the same time, we hear that numbers are down in congregations. That's enough to get any parish priest quite irate if he can't actually fill his congregation, let alone the people who do.
And wasn't there that astonishing figure that 26% of baptisms last year were on migrants?
Yes, this is. I mean, it's clearly
that's quite a lot.
It's clearly something that has got round. Not unlike when people discovered, there's this thing called the Modern Slavery Act, and you can get round it by get round deportation by claiming that you're a victim of modern slavery. People are not stupid. They do find a few things out about the countries that they move to and the systems in place. But this is ultimately, though, I talk about sort of falling congregations. That's where the future of Christianity is. It's not in the developed world. It's in the third world, and it's people moving from Africa and the Middle East. That is where people are being converted, or in the case of sub-Saharan Africa, that's where they are to begin with. So from the Church of England's perspective, you can understand why they actually are very in favour of bringing people over.
Keep your figures up.
Absolutely. Bums on seats.
Astonishing. Emma, the Daily Express front page, you can't help wondering whether they've put it on the front page because that's what Daily Express readers really want to read, that Rishi is going to welcome Boris Johnson back.
This one has been swirling around for a few days, and I think it's more a case. Well, there are two things. Firstly, canny politicians. It was, I think, last week we were saying the same about Nigel Farage. The next day, he was at the popcorn launch saying, "No, I wouldn't rejoin the Conservatives." It's one of those canny politicians don't rule out anything, do they? Why would he rule anything out? They don't rule anything in. They don't rule anything out. They say, "Of course, I'd be open to." This thing about Boris Johnson possibly making a return to frontline politics. Sunak has spoken to him in the past few months. That's hardly a kind of, discussing your imminent new appointment at the top of the government at all.
Yeah, but to be fair, we didn't know Rishi Sunak was chatting up David Cameron for the foreign job.
No, we didn't. No, we didn't. Although I think there was an awareness that Cameron wanted to come back, wanted to do something, and that they got on well.
So would Boris Johnson like being elevated to the House of Lords, maybe?
Look, I don't know. I think Boris Johnson would adore that. I mean, Boris Johnson would absolutely.
That's really the only way he could.
Boris Johnson in Ermine,
yes.
It seems quite unlikely, given what he's doing now, that he would want to return as a sort of, backbench MP.
He wouldn't want to be a backbencher, and he wouldn't necessarily want to be under someone else's leadership.
That's what I mean. Would he want to just do the work of an MP, or would he want something really, really quite significant?
Well, he couldn't be an MP in time, could he? So he'd have to be Lord Johnson, wouldn't he? Lord Boris.
Unless you were promising him a safe seat at the next election, and that's part of the spin, is to say to the electorate, I'll bring him back.
How do you time that in time?
It's very difficult. Yeah. But again, I don't think Boris Johnson would want to be tied to a sinking ship. He likes to portray himself as a winner, and Rishi Sunak is going to lose. Ultimately, also, I just think when it comes to Sunak, we had this also, you mentioned Cameron, but it also transpired he'd been talking to Dominic Cummings quite a lot. It does seem to me just any name that can be thrown out just to see what the response is. But the key thing is, and I know GB viewers generally quite like Boris Johnson, we can't forget, actually, the mess that Rishi Sunak inherited was largely Boris Johnson's mess. That polling had been going down and had hit quite a nasty point on Boris Johnson's watch. Very popular with a lot of Conservatives, but with the general public, I think a lot of that stardust had gone with Boris Johnson.
Yeah, we do seem to be in a situation where politicians are quite Marmite. Certainly on the Conservative side. Yeah. I mean, less Marmite on the Labour side, but that's because no one really knows quite what they're standing for at the minute.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. In the Conservatives, at least we have some figures that people do recognise and do know. It's really, really hard if you talk to the general public to get them to identify. I mean, Rachel Reeves, for example, our potential Chancellor in a few months, she wouldn't be identifiable. Really, Keir Starmer is not that identifiable to many, many British people in this country, who's the leader of the opposition. And
mind you, I have to say, I was somewhere yesterday and I was saying, I'm doing this thing on Monday with the Prime Minister, and she did say to me, well, who is the Prime Minister?
Wow.
So that's a good question. Who is the Prime Minister, mentally speaking?
I mean, we know that we've got two of the blandest men at the top of politics. You know, I often think, is this the best we've got? But then I think about America.
Yes.
Biden and Trump, the best they've got out of a population of hundreds of millions.
Apparently so.
It's very
If you're
odd,
American,
isn't
you've
it?
got to make a choice.
You have. OK, Emma, Benedict, thanks very much indeed. Back with those two a little bit later on. But here's Aidan with your weather.